I'm Lydia from Lagrange United Methodist Church's youth group.
I'm Kara Howard. I'm a local parent community member.
And we're going to talk about mental health today. So I have some questions here. Let's start out with the first question. What has been your experience with mental illness?
So I grew up in a household that was very, I would say, conservative. We grew up very conservative Baptist. And mental health wasn't a thing when I grew up. I was born in 1981, so you do the math on that. But it wasn't something that was talked about often, and in our church environment, and the way that we were kind of raised, there was not a lot of talk about mental health from the perspective that it could be an imbalance of chemicals. It could be due to a lot of different things. It was more like a sin issue. And so people who suffered and struggled during that time weren't necessarily given any resources or counseling like we have today that's available to us. So my mother suffered, I believe, her whole life, but she didn't get diagnosed till she was in her 60s with severe OCD. And so there was a lot of kind of trickle down of different things based on her untreated illness that ended up looking, a different way in our home. If she had been treated in different ways, I believe she would have been much more able to care for us, maybe in the way that we needed. But there was always kind of an unspoken thing in our household growing up that this is just, how mom is, and we just, as children, need to deal with that. I found myself often, and I was the oldest of three, so I was kind of the mama bear of the my brother and sister. So, and my dad, they were 19 when they got married. They were very young, and they did their best, but they didn't know a lot about a lot. And I give them credit for, providing for us, keeping a roof over our heads, when we were little, and caring for us the best that they could. So.
Mm-hmm. So you already talked about your mom a little bit, but do you know of anybody else in your family that had mental illness, or have you been diagnosed with anything?
I have not been diagnosed with anything myself. I went through a period of time after pregnancy with some probably more minor, like postpartum depression symptoms that I wasn't really treated for. But I do. I do have other people in my family that I suspect are undiagnosed because of being afraid to go seek help because of religious reasons. There's a lot of churches still out there today, and I know this is not one of those churches, but there are a lot of churches out there today that still teach the whole, that mental struggles are due to sin primarily. And so a lot of those people are still not encouraged to go get help from a licensed person. They might see like a church counselor, but that church counselor will turn around and tell them, this is a God issue, not a body issue. So.
Mm-hmm. All right, our next question is, how did you get help? Did you see a professional or take medicine, or did somebody help you navigate?
So we didn't get help from my mom until she was in her 60s, unfortunately, because we didn't know enough as her kids. We just sort of were used to that behavior. We didn't know. And different things started happening when we moved out of the house that we were made aware of by my dad. And so we were able to get both of them into a counseling environment for maybe 6 months to a year. But unfortunately, that kind of exacerbated or started, unraveling a lot of things that maybe should have been unraveled earlier. The counselor that we went to was somebody that they were familiar with and comfortable with, but again, it was that same thing of not getting her the clinical help that she needed, the medical help that she needed. And so, unfortunately, my parents' marriage ended like probably a year or two after they started seeking counseling because it was a lot of struggle, not the right resources. And then about a year after they divorced, my mom passed away from a blood clot. So there were a lot of dynamics there that we were starting to have some hope that she was getting to a place where she herself could accept therapeutic and clinical care. But then, she unfortunately passed away before we could see kind of the end of what that might look like for her. So,
How did your church friends help through all this?
well, say the question again. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
How did your church friends help? And I think
So,
this
yeah,
could, I think
church
this
friends.
could also be, how did your community help you? Because I think that's really the root of this question is.
So this is the first time I've really shared publicly about any of this. We happened to be visiting here a few Sundays ago because our son was filling in the worship band, and Crystal asked for volunteers to speak, and I sort of felt led, this is a time to open up this conversation. I know a lot of young kids in our community who do struggle with mental health, and adults as well that are probably grew up in the same era that I did, probably have the same kind of mindset issues around it. So I didn't have that support really, but that was because I had distanced myself from that community. I'm sure had I been in a little bit more of an open mind about receiving support, I'm sure people would have been there. But it's also a really hard, it's a private thing. And it's something that when you're in the midst of it, it feels like, oh, well, I don't want to talk badly about my mom, I don't want to put some of that on some of my pain from my experiences with her growing up. I don't want to have that be a public thing, but also I think at this point, it's been 3 years, I think it can be useful in some ways to be able to speak honestly and openly about my experience. So,
Yeah. Well, we're glad you're here.
so thanks.
What did you wish someone had told you that you want to make sure and tell youth today?
Ooh, let's see. I think if someone had validated to me that my experiences were not normal and that they were real, and not just what I had to go through because, maybe everybody has to go through this. That's kind of what I thought, until I was in my 30s, I thought that. But I hope that if there are any youth here that have a similar situation, or maybe you're struggling yourself with mental health, if there are people in your life telling you that you should not seek help, that you should get on your knees and pray about it, which I do believe is valuable, and I do still have a relationship with God. I still call myself a Christian, more of a Jesus follower these days. But I would just say, if anybody in your life is speaking to you in that way, it's not a person that is necessarily bringing love and the love of Christ into the equation, and that's not a helpful person. Not that that's a bad person. It might be a misinformed person. It might be a person who has never dealt with anything hard in their life before, and actually tried to pray it away. And so I think that it's important to kind of, in your best judgment, be able to take the words of those types of people with a grain of salt and kind of move on to more supportive, make room in your life for more support of people who really care about you, really see you, really love you, and are not willing to pass blame onto you for your own hard experiences.
Mm-hmm. All right. Anything else you want to add?
I don't know, unless you guys have, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to